Okay, so we're on Kuf Gimel Amud Beis, 103 before. So we were talking about still the day that Rebbe died, and that two of his helpers, he said they were going to die. He said they were going to serve him. People thought it meant they were going to serve him and take care of burying him, but they died before he died. So then they read, okay, it meant an Olam Haba. So a lot of the things that he said the day he died, they interpreted it one way, and then when things worked out a different way, they realized he meant something else. Or at least that's what the Gemara seems to be telling us. Who is going to be the Rosh Hashiva, and then Reb Chanina or whoever it was didn't go. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, so Rav Afes died, and Reb Chanina is the Rosh Hashiva, and then Levi went down to Bavel. So the Gemara asks, V'hahavi Reb Chia. But Reb Chia was a Talmud of Rav Yehuda Nasi, and he was still alive. So why wasn't he the Rosh Hashiva? Why did Rebbe appoint Rav Chanina? So the Gemara says, Nach nafshe, he was already died. So Nach nafshe literally means his soul was resting, but that means that he died. So V'hamar Rab Chia, but Rab Chia says, Ani ra'isi kivro shel Rebbi, I saw the kever of Rebbe. So even though the word kever normally means the burial place, Rashi says it means the casket of Rebbe. He says, I cried over it. Horati loved the mouse, and I was crying over it. So Reb Chia was alive when Rebbe died. So the Gemara says Eipuch. We have to say it the opposite. That when Reb Chia died, Rebbe shed tears over Reb Chia. V'amar Reb Chia, but Reb Chia says Osa Yom Shemeis Rebbe Batla Kedusha. But Reb Chia, we have a statement from Reb Chia that said the day that Rebbe passed away, the Kedusha was nullified, or there was no more Kedusha. So Reb Chia was still alive. So the Gemara says Eipuch. You have to turn it around. So I'm going to say this now, but it has to be said somewhere. Normally, according to the Masorah, um, Rebbe composed the Mishnah. We mentioned a couple weeks ago. Did he compose it as an oral text or as a written text? According to some, he only made an oral text. And according to some, no. Once he composed the text, he composed it and he had it written down. And so I think the Rambam says I was looking for it, but I didn't see it. What do you mean by oral text? Meaning there was Torah Shabbal Peh is whatever we is what we could say, but it's not limited to a certain text. So he said so he said Me'ematai Korn Kriyash Maba'arvin. That's the beginning of the text of Masachet Brachot. So that Rebbe made this is the text of the Mishnah. So some say some say Torah Shabbal Peh can't even be limited to an oral text. But because of the need of the time, Rebbe composed an oral text and said, this is the Mishnah, this is the Torah Shabbal Peh. And some said, no, once it had to be composed, he even wrote it down. So the Rambam, maybe because I didn't see it, because maybe it's in the Hakdama to Yad HaChazak, and I was looking in the Hakdama to the Mishnah, but the Rambam says that a generation or so after Rebbe, they had certain questions that they would learn the Mishnayot and they didn't know the right answer. So because of that, Reb Chia composed the Tosefta. So the Tosefta is similar to the Mishnah, except it's a little different and it's more authoritative than the Braisos, because the Braisos that we have were never compiled. But the Toseftas, when Reb Chia composed the Toseftas, it was to answer any of these remaining questions that a generation later or so that they didn't know. So according to this Gemara, to these Gemaras that Reb Chia died first, it's very difficult to say the way the Rambam said that he composed it to answer up the questions. Unless you say, and it's not a very good answer, is that Rebbe didn't compose it the day he died. It was composed earlier. So maybe he lived another 20 years, 40 years, we don't know exactly how long. And maybe while he was still alive, Reb Chia composed the Tosefta. It's schwer. It's not such a great answer. I think it's a bad answer actually. Um, so some say, and these are people who don't necessarily follow the Masorah so well, so I don't know if I should quote them at all. I surely won't say who they are. They think that the Tosefta was written kind of along the same time as as the Mishnah. Which, according to this Gemara, you kind of have to say this. If Rabbi Chia died before Rebbe did, you would have to say that. But it's against what the Rambam says, so it's a very it's an issue that I don't have a good answer for. Okay, so we're going to talk about this Batla Kahuna. Excuse me, Batla Kedusha. So Vahatanya, we learned in a Brayisa, Kishachala Rebbe, when Rebbe became sick before he died, Nichnas Rebbe Chia Etzlo Mitzoshu Bocha. Rebbe Chia came in and saw him crying. Amar Lo, Rebbe Chia said, Rebbe Pnei Mata Bocha. Rebbe, why are you crying? Vatanya, we learned in a brisa, Meis mitochas chok siman yafalo. If someone dies while he's laughing, or if it's a good sign for him, mitoch siman ralo. If he dies while he's crying, it's a bad sign for him. Panav lamala siman yafalo. If he dies when his face is up, it's good for him. Panav lamata siman ralo. If his face is down, it's a bad sign for him. Panav klape ha'am siman yafalo. If his face are towards the people, it's a good sign. And we turn to the next. If you're in the article, you turn to the next page. Klape akosel siman ralo. But if he dies with his face facing the wall, it's a bad sign for him. Panav yerukim siman ralo. If his face is pale, yerukim literally means we yarok is green, but in the Mishnah we're not so sure that it's green or yellow, something like that. But it's pale. It's a bad simon for him. Part of tzuhuvim vadumim simon yafalo. If they're golden or red, it's a good sign. I mean, it happens to be it's more lifelike, but it's saying about that he dies. But Mace Bear of Shabbos simon yafalo. If he died on Erev Shabbos, it's a good sign. Rashi says he goes to the menucha immediately, maybe because there's no din of Gehenna on Shabbos. But Rashi says it's a good sign for him. But Motzai Shabbos Simon Ralo. If he dies right after Shabbos, it's a bad sign for him. Meis be'erev Yom Kippurim Simon Ralo. If he dies on Erev Yom Kippur, it's bad because if he would have lived for Yom Kippur, he would have had kapara from Yom Kippur. But Motzai Yom HaKippurim Simon Yafalo. If he died right after Yom Kippur, it's a good sign um because he just had kapara. Meis mecholim me'ayim siman yafalo. If he died from a stomach ailment, it's a good sign. Rashi doesn't say, but some say because in those days, this stomach problems was very painful and bad. So you had yisurim, which would help atone for any things you needed atonement for. The majority of tzaddikim die through the stomach problem. So Reb Chia said this to Rebbe when Rebbe started. So it seems Reb Chia was alive when Rebbe died. So Amar Lo, Rebbe answered, Ara Torah mitzvos kabachina. I'm crying about the Torah and the mitzvos that I can't do. They have a story from the Vilna Gaon, I think, or so. Hasidic people have this same story with certain Hasidic Rebbe, but he said for a few pennies you have these tzitzis, you fulfill a mitzvah, and in Olam Haba you can't fulfill the mitzvah anymore.
He cried before dying, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But he's saying we can't do any mitzvahs here for just a few pennies. You can do a mitzvah. It's not nowadays where it costs $40 to buy a set of tefillin. I mean, a set of halavai for tefillin for a pair of tzitzis.
Well, you want techelas, it's more.
Okay. So according to this, Reb Chia was still alive. So why did Rebbe make Reb Chia his Talmud? Ibay Seima Epuch. So one answer would be that you have to flip the words. And Reb Chia said all this to Rebbe. Rebbe said this to Reb Chia when Reb Chia was on his deathbed. V'ibay Seima, or he could say Liolam Lo Tepuch. We could say that Reb Chia was alive when Rebbe died. Reb Chia asuk b'mitzvos hava, but Reb Chia was very busy doing certain mitzvos. For Rebbe Savar Lo Afgare, and Rebbe felt that he shouldn't take him away from doing his mitzvos, so he did not appoint him as the Rosh Hashiva. What the mitzvos were, Rashi doesn't say. Okay, so one thing we have to say Okay, so one thing that in order to continue was Reb Chia, did Reb Chia die first? Reb Chia that so according to this, once we say this that Reb Chia must have been alive, so now we could say that the previous Gemaras, the two previous incidents that happened, that we say that Reb Chia were 103b5, that Reb Chia definitely lived after Rebbe. Okay, so now the Rambam is safe because Reb Chia lived after Rebbe and he composed the Tosefta later. Okay, so what did that line mean when Rebbe died? Kedusha ended. So Tosfos in his first explanation says he was a very holy person. He did holy things. We're going to see something on the next Amud also about this, but I won't jump the gun. So Reb Chaim Cohn, who was one of the Balei Tosfos, gives a very, very interesting answer, which we don't paskin like, except he paskin like it, obviously. And Reb Chaim Cohn, who himself was a Kohen, said that for Rabbeinu HaKadosh, for Rebbe, he was so kadosh that everyone, even Kohanim, were supposed to become Tameh for his funeral. And that's why Batla Kedusha, even though Kohanim normally, the mitzvah, or they were supposed to be kadosh and not become Tameh, for someone of the caliber of Rebbe, they were supposed to become Tameh. That's what Reb Chaim Cohn said. Okay. So back in the Gemara, where so the third wide line at the bottom of Kuf Gimel Amid Beis, or 103b5, the second column. Behind Udechihavu Minzu Reb Chanina of Reb Chia, and this, the way that we're answering now, that really Reb Chia was alive, but he was busy doing other mitzvos, so Rebbe did not appoint him Rosh Hashiva. Then we could answer up we could explain a different conversation between Reb Chanina and Reb Chia that we know about. Amarle Reb Chanina Reb Chia, and there's a famous Gemara Rav Aaron quoted from a Gemara about Mitzia. It's the same Gemara is there, and it's in his book on Parsham, and he mentioned it. I think he mentioned it at the building dedication here in 1999, but maybe he didn't mention this Gemara. I think he did, and my father mentioned this from time to time. Amarle Reb Chanina Reb Chia. Reb Chanina said to Reb Chia, "Bahadi didi minsas, you're arguing with me? If God forbid, Torah would be forgotten from Yisrael. I will return it from my pilpul. I can give such intricate and detailed shiurim. I will bring back Torah." Amarle Reb Chia. Reb Chia says, "Ana avdi de lo mishtachach Torah Yisrael." I would do things so that Torah wouldn't be forgotten from Yisrael. Daitina bitana v'shadina. I will get flax and plant it. Umegadla nishbi, and then I will make nets out of the flax. V'tzaydna tavya, and I'm going to catch a deer. Tavya, the tes and the tzadi interchange in Aramaic from the Hebrew. So tavya is a tzvi. I will get deer. Umachilna bisrul yasmi, and I will feed the meat of the deer to orphans. Va'arichna megilsa mimashche de tavya, and I'm going to make a megillah. So it seems he means Sifrei Torah, but maybe he just means he didn't make a real Sefer Torah, but still you wrote on parchment. So from the skin of the deer, he's going to make Megillos, Visalikna Lamasa de Lesbe Makri Dardiki, and I'm go to a place where they don't have a teacher for the children, because even Chamisha Chumshe Lachamisha Yanuke. On the parchment, I'm going to write the 5 Chumashim for five children. So we know we call it Chamisha Chumshe Torah. The Gemara in Shabbos, I think it's Perkal Kisvei, I think, mentions about the nun, the upside down nun. It's Shaykh for next Shabbos, not this Shabbos, but excuse me, in Baloscha in 2 weeks. That Vayhi bin saw Aaron, there's backwards nuns surrounding it. So the Gemara in Shabbos there says that it's really separating Bamidbar into a separate book, that Vayhi bin Soa is its own sefer. And the reason that we have to separate it is because there's two bad things that happen in a row. Now, the first one is it's not so clear what it is. The second thing is with the Bnei Yisrael Kamis Onanim. They were complaining and they wanted meat. So I think Rashi says, or maybe it's the Ramban, I don't remember who, but one of them says, so what was the thing that happened first that was bad, that there's two things in a row? Because the Torah says they've traveled for the first time from Har Sinai, and it says, Kitino Kabarech Mi Beis HaSefer. So they didn't want to get any more laws. They wanted to run away from Har Sinai as fast as possible to not get more laws, and then they complained. So two bad things in a row were bad. So Vayhi ben Soa wasn't supposed to be there, but it was put there to interrupt between these two bad things. So according to that, there's really seven books of the Torah, but it was written out of order in order to in the Vayhi ben Soa was put in that place to stop that from happening, and those backward nuns symbolize it. So according to that, there's seven books of the Torah, but still it's always universal that we say Chamisha Chumshei Torah. So he wrote this Torah, and he was going to teach obviously one sefer to each of the boys, or maybe if they knew how to read, he would just oversee them, and they'll learn the Chumash. Umasnisa shisa sidre l'shisa yinuke, and the Mishnah I'm going to teach the six sidre Mishnah to six orphans. So each one I'm going to teach each one to one of them. The chol chad v'chad amri la, and to each I say, asni sidrach lechavrach, teach your order to the next one. So, um, so basically, he was going to teach five boys Chumash, six boys Mishnah, and then have them teach each other, and through that, the Torah will not be forgotten. Rav Aaron says from here the difference between Reb Chanina and Reb Chia was that Reb Chanina was using the idea of chazaka, brute force, was using chazaka, brute force, and Reb Chia was using the idea of excuse me, Reb Chanina was using kibush, brute force, and Reb Chia was using Reb Chia was using chazaka. Chazaka in the sense of Bnei Yisrael, they just in the time of Ezra, they just came back to Eretz Yisrael and settled it. So they didn't use any force. So things that and so because they just came and stayed and stayed and stayed, the roots that happen from that are much deeper than the roots from a military conquest. Because when you do kibush, by force you take it over, someone forces you out, you're gone. But because they just came and settled and didn't leave, that was chazaka, and according to the Rambam, that kedusha can never be nullified. The kedusha of Eretz Yisrael from Ole Bavel. So he said Reb Chia's thing of doing everything himself and teaching one kid to teach another kid. It's a longer process. It's a much longer process, but it's a more surer process. The bonds that he makes that way are much stronger. So it seems to be from this, that Reb Chia was involved in mitzvos and and uh, and to feed the orphans, he was more involved. I mean, he wasn't going to be a Rebbe. He didn't need to. He was too busy to be a Rebbe. But for this, if Torah be forgotten, he would go through this much length. It's years and years of stuff to plant the flax, and then to make it into the nets, and to catch the dare, and to teach. And I mean, to feed the dare, you're only going to feed them for a few days because they didn't have refrigeration back then, unless he was gonna salt it and make it into beef jerky or venison jerky. But the process of him giving over, making these kesher, the bond with each of the students, and then having the students teach each other, he's training them to teach also. That's how Torah wouldn't be forgotten. But the fact that it seems that the fact that this was his approach showed that he was more involved in mitzvos and not just involved in being the Rosh Hashiva. So it would have been a taking away from his mitzvos to make him Rosh Hashiva. So that's why Rebbe didn't make him Rosh Hashiva. The Hainu da Rebbe. Okay, so and then in the article we turned to 103b6. The Hainu da Rebbe, and that's why Rebbe said Kama Gedola Maisachia. How great are the deeds of Chia? Because Reb Chia was so involved in these mitzvos, so he didn't want to. Nowadays, Eli told a certain person that who was a Rosh Hashiva, he says, "Look, you have no time to learn anymore because all you're doing is you're raising money all the time." He says, "Baruch Hashem, Rav Aaron's sons, none of them are Rosh Hashiva. They don't have to go around and collect money." Of course, Gedolim Imre Eli, but he was able to do more mitzvahs not being Rosh Hashiva. In those days, he didn't have to fundraise. There's no doubt about it. Reb Chia, that's the modern thing now of having to go fundraise. But I will say that there's a tradition of a shlucha d'Eretz Yisrael. There's a shlucha d'Eretz Yisrael, a shlucha. So the Chida went throughout the world to collect money for the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. Rav Kook went around the world to raise money for for the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. There's a Wikipedia page even in English about it. But that's why Rav Kook wasn't in Israel for many years because he was happened to be um, in Europe when World War One started, and luckily he was not in a place where he would have been recognized as an enemy. So I think he spent a lot of time in Switzerland, which was neutral, but he was not in Eretz Yisrael, but he couldn't go because of the war. The war, but luckily he wasn't in an enemy, a resident enemy, whatever they called back then. But he traveled and raised money. And actually, Josh Hoffman wrote an article about Rav Kook's trip to America. So Rav Kook was also in Chicago and obviously in other cities in New York and Chicago and other cities in the United States. Amrle Reb Shimon bar Rebbi, Reb Shimon the son of Rebbi, who we mentioned last week, Afilu mimcha, are Reb Chia's deeds even greater than yours, Abba? Amrle, yeah, yes, they are. Amrle Rebbi Shmuel bar Rebbi Yossi. Rabbi Shmuel bar Rebbi Yossi said to Rebbi, Afilu me Abba, are Reb Chia's deeds greater than my father, Rebbi Yossi? Amrle chas v'shalom, lo take zos b'Yisrael. Chas v'shalom, anyone should say this. No one should ever say that he was giving tremendous praise about Rabbi Yossi. Or Rashi says, Rebbe is saying, I know I never said that they were greater than your father's actions. Okay, so now back to what Rebbe was commanding on the day of his death. Amar lehen, Rebbe said to them, Livni katan ani tzarech, I need my younger son. Nichnas Rabbi Shimon Etzel, Rabbi Shimon came in the room. Masr lo sidrei chachma. He gave him the orders of chachma, of wisdom. So ArtScroll brings down here that he taught him certain secrets which would be taught to the Avestin of the Ma'aser Merkava, I think. Yeah. Amr Lahan, then Rebbe said, Livni Gadol ani tzarech, I need my older son. Nichnas Rabbi Gamliel Etzlo. Rabbi Gamliel, who was the Nasi, notice his title is Rabban, not Rebbe's, because he was the Nasi. He was going to be the next Nasi. Umaslo Sidre Nisius, he taught him the order of being a Nasi. Amar lo b'ni nahog Nisius chabaramim. You should lead your your term of being Nasi Baramim. The ones who are so Ramim could be high. Rashi says you should sit between the great ones. So I don't know if it means literally the great ones are alive, but he's blessing him that he should have be a great leader. Zerog mar betamidim, and spread fear or awe over the Talmidim that they are going to be in fear or awe of you. They shouldn't feel comfortable. Ini, is that true though that the Talmidim you have to make them be in fear or awe of you? But it says Vesir Hashem Yechabed. So there's a pasuk in Tehillim that those who fear God should be honored. The Amar Mar, and it was taught in a brayso, Zeh Yehoshaphat Melch Yehuda. This pasuk refers to Yehoshaphat, the king of Yehuda, Keshayara Tamid Chacham, when he would see a Tamid Chacham, Haya Omed Mikiso Mechavko Benashko. He would get up from his throne or his chair, and he would hug him and kiss him. V'korilo Rebbi, Rebbi, Mari, Mari. And he called him my master, my teacher, my teacher, my master, my master. So So if he treated the other Torah scholars with love like this, why should Rabbi Gamliel not treat them with love but make them fear him? So the Gemara says, "Lokasha habetzina habefarhesia." No, when you're in private, then you don't have to. You could be show them much more love, but in public, they have to. They must fear you and show fear. Tanya. We learned in the Brisa, Rebbe motobetzipori umalka muchan lo sha'arim. Rebbe was sick, or it seems probably even when he died. So he died in Tzipori, and he had a burial place in Beis Sha'arim. Gatanya, the question, but the Bryce, but we have a question on this because a different Bryce says. What? Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. That's because you didn't eat. So in a few minutes, I'll give you food, okay? Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. In Parsha Shoftim, righteousness, righteousness you should pursue. Halacha Rebbi levei sha'arim. They say, follow Rebbi to Beis Sha'arim. If you want to learn Torah and learn tzedek, go to Rebbi in Beis Sha'arim. So according to that brisa, though, it seems that Rebbi lived in Beis Sha'arim. According to what we just said, he was buried in Beis Sha'arim, but he didn't live in Beis Sha'arim. So the Gemara says, Rebbi b'Beis Sha'arim hava. No, Rebbi really was in Beis Sha'arim. Ela kevan shachalash, but once he was weak or sick from his illness, amtuhuyu litzipori. They brought him to Tzipori, and now we're turning to Kuf Dalet Amud Aleph. The medallia, because it was very high up, it was a higher altitude. Uvasim avira, and it had fragrant air. So it was good air for him. So Rav Moshe, Rav Aaron's uncle, the brisker Rav Yitzchak Zev. So he lived in Geula, but he needed to take walks. So they would, I don't know, they would drive him or whatever to what's now Bayit Vagan. Back then it was nothing, to take walks away where it was quiet and the air was fresher. And the boy who frequently they had him take walk with him, was his name was Chaim Goldvicht, and later he became the Rosh Hashiva of Kerem B'Yavneh. He was the first Rosh Hashiva of a Hesder Yeshiva, but he was very Haredi. He learned by the Chazon Ish. Was young here with Revelvel. So to go to a place where the air was Beit Vegan is a relatively high place in Yerushalayim, I think. So Lahavdil, even the Briskerov in the late 1950s or in the night would go for the clear air for some walks for his health. But he didn't move there. There was there wasn't any houses there or infrastructure. How Yom Adonach Nafshe the Rebbe, the day that Rebbe died, Gazra Rabbanan Tanisa. The Rabbanan instituted a public fast. Uba Rachme, and they davened. Literally, they asked for mercy from Hashem. The Amrin, they said, Koman de Amar Nach Nafshe de Rebbe, Yidakar B'charav. Whoever says that Rebbe died should be pierced with a sword. So it's a way of saying they were telling that no one should say that Rebbe died. Whether this is literally or there's an idea, al tiftach peh l'satan. I think we saw it earlier in the Masechta a long time ago. But al tiftach peh l'satan. Don't do something that gives an opening for the satan to then uh, to grab onto. So if someone would say, or lahavdil, a certain prime minister of Israel, I won't say who it is, had been incapacitated by a stroke, and he was for a long time. So Aaron Levone told us that there's a website, is so and so dead.com or whatever. And if he was still alive, the site was green and it said he's still alive. And then when he died, it went red and it said yes. So in this, they didn't. So I don't think if Rebbe would have died, would it have been a problem to say that he died? I can't imagine that it was. So I think it's not just to say you can't say that Rebbe died. I think that you shouldn't even ask, should he die? You shouldn't have that negative attitude, even though there was obviously a big aura of inevitability because of the grave sickness that Rebbe was suffering. But maybe the reason that they wanted this was that they didn't want al tiftach peh l'satan. They didn't want a satan to have a way in.
But here they didn't want people to know he was dead and then pray for his resurrection. I mean,
Mashiachas back then.
yeah, well, we've seen that before.
That's what I'm saying. And many around that time too, 150 years before that also, supposedly, after 150 years later.
Yeah.
After 150 years later, they said 300 years before it happened. That's what it said in here.
Yeah. Mm.
Oh, but that's from the Ben Yoyada. So that's based on Kabbalah. That's as much different than what we're talking about. So I'm not the Ben Yoyada probably brings from Kisvei Ari. I'm not, but All right, it says here because we know that when Rebbe was suffering, there were no miscarriages and things like that. So they knew that if Rebbe would die, this generation would suffer a lot because the fact that Rebbe was there was he uh, he protected the generation and took a lot of suffering so that other people, the whole generation was better. Okay, so Slika Amte de Rebbe Leigra Amara. So the maidservant of Rebbe, who we mentioned her last week, and we mentioned her quite a while ago, who was a very the Chachamim learned things from the way she said. She went to the roof and said, "El Yonim Mavakshimis Rebbe." The ones above, meaning Rabbanu Shalom, wants Rebbe. Vatachtonim Mavakshimis Rebbe, and the people down below want Rebbe. Yehi Ratzon Sheikafu Tachtonim Es El Yonim. May it be the will that the ones on the lower will force um, the upper ones. She was saying that it was like a davening that the tefillah should be accepted and he should stay alive. But when they saw how often he had to go to the bathroom because he had this chole me'ayim, the stomach ailment that we just mentioned a few lines above, and he kept taking off his tefillin when he had to go to the bathroom. And then when he came out of the bathroom, he put the tefillin back on, become mitzdayer, and he was suffering. Amra, the maidservant of Rebbe said, "He ratzon sheikuf al yonim es atachtonim." May it be the will that the Elyonim are going to be able to overtake the ones on the lower world. But the Chachamim did not stop from davening for Rabbi's recovery. Shakla kuza, so she took a small cheres, a small earthenware vessel. Shadia me'igra la'ara, she threw it from the roof to the ground, so it broke. And and then when they heard the crash, ishtik mirachmev, they were quiet from davening for a moment. V'nachnavshe the Rebbe, and at that moment, Rebbe died. So there's similar Gemaras like this. There's a Gemara in Shabbos that Rabbi and there's a Gemara in Makos also. But the Gemara in Shabbos is that David HaMelech knew he was going to die on Shabbos, so he used to learn all Shabbos, so the Malach HaMavis couldn't get him while he was learning Torah. So the Malach HaMavis made something crash. When he heard the noise, he looked up, and at that moment, the Malach HaMavis got him. There's a similar Gemara in the second parak of Makos, similar to that. So at the moment that they stopped davening because the Amsa Rebbe made that thing crash, so that's when he died. Now about him that he kept taking off his tefillin. So Tosos asked, if you're sick with tefillin, you shouldn't put with the stomach ailment, you shouldn't put on tefillin at all. So you're putter from tefillin because you don't want to not have a clean body when you're wearing tefillin. So it says Rebbe led himself with kedusha. He comported himself with holiness, yoser midai, more than he needed, and he knew how to keep his body clean and wear the tefillin, and it wasn't going to be a problem. I think to say pshat in this, you could say that the Tosfos doesn't say it here, but again, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was also called Rabbeinu Hakadosh. So for many reasons, and one of the things that the Rambam says at the end of Hilchos Tefillin is that when someone's wearing tefillin, they are much holier than they are when they're not wearing tefillin. So it could be Rabbeinu Hakadosh, in order to be holy, he wanted to wear tefillin as much as possible because the tefillin changes the person. Just like Shabbos makes us, and that's one of the reasons why if Shabbos is an os, we don't need tefillin, because the kedusha of Shabbos, of the day of Shabbos, changes us. Rabbi Yujan, I mentioned what Rabbi Yujan said many times. And so, I mean, the highest level is to make the physical act into a spiritual act, the act of eating. But that's why, according to Machlokas Rishonim, that some say if that how do you rest? What's Oneg Shabbos? You take a nap on Shabbos. So it's a machlokas. If people learn Torah during the week, should they learn more Torah on Shabbos, or should they rest by taking a nap on Shabbos? And the people who work during the week, should they learn Torah on Shabbos to be different, or can they take the nap? One of the explanations is that I mean the Meiri mentions both in machlokas between him and his Rabbeim. His Rebbeim says if you learn Torah during the week, you should learn on Shabbos also, and if you work during the week, you should sleep on Shabbos. And the Meiri argues, and he says if you learn during the week, you should sleep on Shabbos as your oneg, and if you work during the week, you should learn Torah. But part of that is that kedusha, when you're on a higher level, when we have kedusha of Shabbos, even if you do a physical act of taking a nap, that you're the it's the Kedusha of Shabbos is changing it. It's not just a plain taking a nap. It's not just a regular physical act. So wearing tefillin changes us, and that's why Rabbeinu Hakadosh. One of the reasons why he's Rabbeinu Hakadosh, not the only reason, but that's I think a good shot in the Tosfos.
This,
Okay, so one thing you have to mention from here: are you allowed to daven that someone could die?
yeah.
There's a Ran in the Dharm on Daf Nun that people want to say that you can't, and the Ran seems to say yes, but no one else seems to say yes, and
Well, they list a few others.
we don't paskin that way though. Where does it say?
Note 7.
No, so Moshe and the Igros Moshe discusses it. He doesn't say you can. He doesn't pass in that you can, but he discusses it. So the Ran, let's just it's a big topic. I'm not going to talk about it now. I'm not going to talk about it on Shavuos either. But why not? Kihen chayenu v'yarach yamenu. Torah is our life. We don't have to worry. We're not gonna. There are plenty.
By no chance that the person will live. That's the question.
So the Ran says, it seems to me that the Gemara here is saying that sometimes you need to daven on a chola that they should die because they're suffering so much, and it's impossible for them to live, as it says in our Gemara in Kesuvos right here, when the Amsa de Rebbe saw how many times Rebbe was going to the bathroom and taking off his tefillin, and it was so painful to him. So, what was it painful him to put on the tefillin, or was it painful with his stomach? And it almost makes it sound like it was very painful for him to put on the tefillin afterwards. But I mean, that's even from our Gemara, not just from the Ran. So she davened that the Elyonim should overcome the ones on this world, as if to say that Rebbe should die, and therefore that someone who's visiting a sick, his tefillah helps to help him get better, because meaning she tefillah yoser moela. So misha ena mavakra ein torachim. So basically, if you this seems to be a different issue. If you visit someone who's sick, do you actually have to daven for them? Or there's a different thing when you daven for someone. If the sick person is where you are, you don't have to mention them by name. You don't have to say Yitzchak Mitzara because you're there. But the Ran only talks about a case where they're in so much pain and they're never going to recover. And unfortunately, in our and not in our generation, but in our current where we are in the year 2025 with all the great science progress that's been made, most of the time the doctors say, they're not going to get better anyway. What do you expect them to do? They're not going to run a marathon. They're not going to do this. So just, it's horrible. The doctors, I don't know. The Hippocratic Oath says do no harm. And what are they saying? Let them die. I don't understand how it's not a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. But a lot of times the doctor the a lot of some illnesses are injuries. It's more with an injury than an illness. The body can't heal itself. It takes time. People who are in a vegetative state for a long time, they were able to hear things, but because they couldn't respond because of what happened, the trauma to their brain, the injury to their brain. But after a few decades, the neurons made new connections, and then they were suddenly able to communicate again. Or lahavdil, this is a little more than 5 years ago. So they said that this girl was brain dead, and then she suddenly started having a period. She became old enough. So it was a big problem for the medical ethicists. If you're dead, she wouldn't be able to have a period. So it showed that their definition of medical brain death was an illusion. So it's a big, difficult topic here, and unfortunately, someone who I mentioned a few, but a nephew, I think, of the Panovich Rav, the Rav of the yeshivas, Rav of Panovich in Europe, and then he founded the Panovich Yeshiva in uh, in Bnei Brak, and he raised a lot of money to make schools for girls, for boys, elementary schools, high schools, yeshivos. He had a nephew who was a boy. He wasn't in concentration camp, but they were in occupied France. And he was a big genius also, but he decided after the war he didn't believe in God. He became very famous. And a year or so ago, his family announced that he died. But how did he die? He said once he was 90 years old, he went to an assisted suicide place somewhere in Europe. And even though his friend said there's nothing wrong with him, he was healthy, he did his mentally he's all there. He decided when he would hit 90, he was gonna go. So it was a year after he died till the reports finally came out that he died by suicide. But uh, but the fact that that's going on in this generation is I mean, in our time, not our generation, it's not a good thing. Hashem gave us life, and even we said in Pirkei Avos that one moment in Olam Hazeh is not that all the good things in Olam Hazeh is not worth even one moment in Olam Haba. But once Hashem put us here, we have to maximize our potential, and it's not for us to say to daven that someone should die. We don't know. The cheshbonos are completely beyond us. The Gemara in Brachos in the first parak, Chizkiyahu HaMelech was sick, so Hashem told Yirmiyahu Hanavi, go visit him. We should be able, but they were both a little bit too stubborn. But so he should have done Bikur Cholim by himself. So Yirmiyahu said, "You're the reason that you're sick and you're going to die now is because you didn't get married and you didn't have any children." So he said, "I saw in Ruach HaKodesh that my descendants are going to worship Avodah Zarah and cause the Beis Hamikdash to be destroyed. I don't want that to happen." So Yirmiyahu Hanavi said, according to the Gemara, "Bahani kavshi derachmana lamali." These hidden things of the Ribono Shel Olam, what are you getting involved in? You have a mitzvah. Whether or not what you see in your Ruach HaKodesh is going to happen or not, it's not your responsibility. You have a mitzvah pru or vu. So you have to get married and do what you can do. Or he didn't say that. He said that's why you're going to die. And so okay, so then he said, so then I have to look at the Gemara. He turned to the wall and so Yirmiyahu said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm davening." He said, "Well, why are you davening? I just told you Hashem said you're going to die because you didn't do this." He says, "I have a tradition back to my ancestor David HaMelech. Afilu cherev chadam menachas al tzavur shel adam al yimnat tzva min harachamim." Even if the sword is on your neck, it's not too late to daven. He said, "You have a daughter. Let me marry your daughter, and maybe the chus of marrying the daughter of the Navi, maybe this what I see in my Ruach HaKodesh isn't going to happen." And he recovered, and he married Yirmiyahu's daughter. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. His grandson was Menashe, who put up an idol, who was king for 55 years and put up. But the fact that he said, but he was able to do tshuva.
Yeah.
Who? Well, Menashe was no, right. But the thing is that even though Yirmiyahu thought it was a foregone thing that he was going to die, he said, "No, I'm davening and I'm going to fix what I did wrong." And he lived. Unfortunately, his grandson did do avodas Zarah in the Beis Hamikdash. But if we're here, we have to do what we have to do. It's not up to us to say, "I'm not going to do it anymore." Mirkei Avos, lo alecha hamlacha ligmar v'lo ata ben chorin libata mimena. So we can't be mevatel ourselves from it, but we don't have the right to daven that Yanim should also. Years, many years ago, well, I shouldn't say many, but it was probably around 2004, 2005. And we had under the Malava Malka where we had a bunch of different shiurim going on. And Ramosha was talking about, I forget exactly what he was talking about, but it came up. What do you deal with children who are born and um, they're extremely um, handicapped and mentally and physically. To my Bubby said, is it, why should we have this? It's not a good thing. And Ramosha said, there's not enough time to give the answer now. So I have two answers to that now. One was Reb Bleich, Rabbi J. David Bleich, who spoke here about brain death here, and I think it was the context of Terry Schiavo's situation was going on. And he mentioned, I think, the name of Rameir Shapiro, who started the Daf Yomi a little more than 100 years ago, but other people say it. There's a thing, Ein Melech Below Am. There's no king without a nation. So every additional person who's a Jew, who's alive, it strengthens Ribono Shel Olam. How, we don't know, but so from that perspective, whether it's someone who is on life support or a young child who's extremely mentally and physically handicapped, that's one answer. And then Ramosha, a few years later, in a Pesach, in a Haggadah share, mentioned there's a Rashi in Parshas Va'era. The pasuk says that something happened, and the people bowed. Vayikdu vayishtachu. They bowed down and to thanks of Hashem. Why? Rashi says al besoros habanim v'al besoros haaretz, and maybe there was a third thing: the fact that they were going to have children, the fact they were going to get Eretz Yisrael, and something else. They thanked Hashem, and the context of that had something to do with maybe the Ben Harasha or something. And so this answer was for Moshe. He gave the answer many years later, several years later, is that all children are a bracha, even if they're to us apparently severely handicapped and can't do anything. They're still a bracha, and we still thank Hashem for that. So it's not. It's not up to us. We have no right. We don't know how Hashem works. But if there's a neshama in this world, some people, or even look at what Reb Chia said. Reb Chia said, these Yisomim, who otherwise would be in bad shape, I'm going to teach them and I'm going to make them leaders. They're going to learn Torah, they're going to teach each other Torah, and Torah will not be forgotten. He saw potential. Sometimes there are some people, and in situations like that, I mean, in Kabbalah, there's a mashpia, someone who can influence others, and there's a mushpa, someone who's receiving the hashpa. Sometimes these people who have very even extremely limited capabilities, but they could inspire other people, though, and cause a Kiddush Hashem. We don't know. We don't know the cheshbon. So we don't have a heter to daven for anyone that they shouldn't live. And Amsa the Rebbe didn't directly daven for him to die either. She didn't daven for him to die. She said upstairs, Elyonim want him, downstairs want. First, she said, let the people and Tachtonim in this world, let them be stronger. And then later, she said, let the ones in the upper world be stronger. She never said, let him die. She never directly said that either. So even the heter that the Ran is saying from our Gemara, there's no heter say, let this person die. It doesn't say, the Gemara doesn't say it. It's very, very difficult issues. But the main thing, Hani Kashi Rahman Alamali. We do not know why Hashem does things. If we are here, we have to do our best and not give up. Like I said, Lo Alecha Hagmoach Ligmor V'La Tapen Chorin Libato Mimena. Related Rabbi Nilabar Kapara. So after the Amsa the Rebbe threw the thing and they stopped davening, they knew something happened. So they asked Bar Kapara, Zil Ayin, go check on Rebbe. He found that Rebbe was no longer alive. His soul left. Kari Lelvushe, he tore his clothes. But then he tore his cloak in the front, and then he put it on backwards so when he went back into the room, they wouldn't see that it was torn. Pasach v'amar, he started and saying, so Rashi says Pasach meant he started giving a hesped. But he said, Arelim umtzukim achazu barna kodesh. The malachim and the righteous ones grabbed on the holy Aaron. Nitzchu arelim esametzukim. The angels were able to be victorious over the righteous ones. The Nishba Aaron HaKodesh, and the Aaron HaKodesh has been captured. Amrulay, they said to Bakbar Nach Nafshe, did Rebbe die? Amrulay, after you said it. I didn't say that. You said it. Va'analo Kamina, I didn't say it. because the Chachamim said no one could say that. The Chachamim said no one could say the Nach Rebbe, so he didn't say that. And then when he gave them the message and they got the message, he said, "You, I didn't say that. You said that," and they got the message. So this the last thing we'll leave off on here is that the Aron Kodesh was captured. So obviously, Talmidei Chachamim have a status like a Sefer Torah. The Gemara uh, in Makos and in Kedushin say, how foolish are people that they stand up for a Sefer Torah, they don't stand up for a great person. Because and I used the drush of the Beis Halevi, I think it's the last drasha number 14, basically saying that a Sefer Torah is written on parchment with black ink, and that represents the Torah Shabbat, but the Talmid Chacham represents the Torah Shabbat Peh. So the body and the blood that make up the person, that's the physical components of the Torah Shabbat Peh. It's not a stira, but the Sefer Torah is the Torah Shabbat, and the Chachamim are Torah Shabbat Peh. So we know that every that a Talmid Chacham is also like a Sefer Torah. Rav Yashaber had a Yortzeit share from decades ago, and he brought there's certain proofs that every Jew is like a Sefer Torah for certain halachos. If you see anyone, if you see a Sefer Torah burning, you have to tear kriya. Or burnt Sefer Torah, you have to tear kriya. If you're in the room when any Jew dies, you have to tear kriya. Rav Yashaber brought things that even every Jew is like a Sefer Torah in some respects. So when the Aaron was captured, Rebbi was taken back. And the Gemara doesn't say it here. It says we learned it in Brachos a while ago, I believe, that Misasim Shel Tzadikim is a big kapara. We're going to see it in a few weeks because we're in Bamidbar already. That with the death of Miriam and the death of Aaron, the Misas Tzadikim is a kapara. It's not a good thing. It's not a good type of kapara we want. But when that happens, it's a huge blow to the entire Klal Yisrael, and from the pain and there's responsibilities we're going to go now. We have to give Hespedim, we have to revere them and honor them in death the way that they need to. We saw Rebbe said you need to give Hespedim for 30 days. Moshe wasn't eulogized for more than 30 days, so I shouldn't be either. But we said that for the year, for the 12 months, they either eulogize him in the night or in the day, and they learned the other time. So I mentioned last week when the Rebbe dies, it's a terrible blow to all the Talmidim. And there's halacha. We mentioned it last week. If the Nasi dies, all the Batei Medrash have to stop learning. And imagine what to have Torah stop, how bad that is. They say in Volozhin that they never stop learning. And they said to the Netziv, how can you, there's always noise coming out. How can you live with all that noise? He said, if there's a guy who has a mill on the river, it's loud. But if it stops, he gets all worried. He runs up and something happens. So if they would stop learning Torah, I would be worried. So I need to hear Torah. They also say this is a little bit. I have no trouble believing about Beis Halevi, but they say after Yom Kippur, everyone went to break their fast. So the Netziv was the only one who was learning the Beis Medrash. I find it a little hard that there was no one else learning the Beis, but that's how the story goes. So, but when the Nasi dies, the Batei Medrash have to stop. So. And we're on the cusp of Shavuos, and one of the goals is the Torah never stops. So, just like we say in the morning that the Korbanos, we mention the parshas of Korbanos, we say mentioning the Korbanos should be as if we brought them, but halavai we should actually be able to bring them. Learning this difficult sugya about Misas Rebbi, when we get kapara, as if a chacham was taken from us, but chas v'shalom that a chacham shouldn't be taken from us. We shouldn't need a kapara, but Hashem should bring us Mashiach, and so we'll return to Yerushalayim. Tishbi we'll have the Beis Hamikdash, we'll have the Sanhedrin again, and we won't need Reb Chia's message of the mitzvahs that he was busy with to restore the Torah. The Torah will get restored through the positive interactions between from one Jew to his fellow Jew.